everybody, guess what? It's part 3 of 4 of the 30 tips, tricks, techniques, features of Photoshop that every photographer, retoucher, everybody out there really ought to know. I feel like I use that phrase a lot, but this is going to be a really cool 4-part series when it's done. We're just covering a nice base of things. If you do enjoy this video, I just have to say before we get started, make sure you subscribe to this channel, and also if you're looking to support the channel or just, hey, support the channel so I can keep making videos like this in the future, go ahead and buy my course. It's all about how to retouch images in Photoshop. If you're not sure if you're going to like it, well, you're going to see a little bit of something here about retouching photos in Photoshop, and if you enjoy this, you'll probably enjoy that link that appeared up there. So maybe at the end of this tutorial, come back to the beginning and use that link and pick up a copy of that course for yourself. If you do, thanks so much. If not, hey, this video is still free, so let's jump in and check it out. And we're going to kick things off here with the 19th technique that I really think you ought to know as a photographer, and that is to lessen wrinkles. I was tempted to name this remove wrinkles, but I think lessen wrinkles is a little bit better of a technique to try to apply to an image. So here we have a lovely old lady. Should I say old lady or should I say seasoned? I like to think of older folks as more seasoned with the wisdom of many years, that kind of thing. Anyway, we're going to go ahead here and create a new layer, and I'm going to call this wrinkle removal. Something like that. It's, you know, again, we're more or less going to be making the wrinkles a little bit more subtle. We're not looking to make it look like she's 20 years old. That wouldn't be very realistic. We're just simply looking to give her about, you know, maybe 10 or 15 years younger. And we're going to do that using one of my favorite tools in Photoshop, and that is the good old healing brush, right? Not the spot healing brush, but the actual real deal, do-it-yourself healing brush. Couple important things here. First and foremost, we want to make sure sample is set to current and below. Reason is we're working up here on a blank layer, so we're going to be working more non-destructively. Therefore, the brush needs to sample not just the current layer, because there's nothing on the current layer, but current and below. I also like to crank the diffusion all the way up. Max diffusion means sort of max healing and blurring around the edges of the brush. I really don't want there to be any sharp or hard edges with this kind of retouching. Diffusion of 1, while there maybe would be a little less haloing and things like that around the edges, which is great when you need it. Diffusion of 7 is what I'm going to work with here and now. Also, my mode is normal, so we're going to roll with normal, and I'm going to zoom in. We'll begin working on her forehead because the forehead's kind of simple. You can see it's slightly kind of out of focus, really. I mean, they tried to catch focus here on her eye, but the image is slightly out of focus. And I should also say, this is where it's great to have a nice graphics tablet because we can easily go in and paint this stuff. I'm going to use my left and right square bracket keys to make this brush larger or smaller. I'm going to make it maybe about that big. Hold down my Alt or Option key and sample from right there on her forehead and just begin painting over her wrinkles. So I'm going to look to essentially remove the wrinkles as best I can. It really does not have to look super duper realistic. It doesn't matter if you can see repeating patterns. We're just looking to really remove big wrinkles. And the more wrinkled a person is, the more difficult it is the more difficult it's going to be to find kind of a nice blank area of skin to sample so you can get some smoothness. But, you know, as you find an area that works and you build off that area and keep building off, you know, the areas as they get bigger. See, now I can sample from this whole nice smooth area that I've created beneath here, right? We just go in and get rid of some of these wrinkles where we'd be looking to smooth things out a little bit. I can come right through here, get rid of this wrinkle, right? Just any you know, very dark areas that are very pronounced wrinkles is kind of what I'm most concerning myself with here. So that wrinkle there, I'll come across and nail that wrinkle there. Great. I'll take this wrinkle here off the edge of her eye. Whoops, I didn't quite sample out far enough. There we go, something kind of like so. That looks good. Great. We can go across the bridge of the nose here. And again, I'm not looking to take out every wrinkle, just a couple of the really, you know, kind of the big ones. And then here underneath the eyes, this is always a big one. If you can get rid of and clean up some of the wrinkliness under the eyes, you can really add some youth to your subject. But as you're going to see here, if we go, and I'm holding down Alt or Option, I'm taking multiple samples, by the way, if you see me, these crosshairs showing up. I'm taking multiple samples. You can see that while it will make the person look quite a bit younger, let's take out the wrinkle here under the other eye. It's really not going to look very realistic. And by the way, I'm just looking to make sure I don't introduce any additional dark areas under the eyes. So that's why I'm making multiple selections here and just making sure I cover any of that stuff up. If I zoom out, you can see it really, I mean, it does make her look quite a bit younger, right? Because we're taking away the bags, but it also doesn't really look all that realistic. Let's do take out a couple more wrinkles here before I show you the final part of this effect. Let's take out that wrinkle there coming out of the side of her head. May come down the side of her cheek here and just wipe that out. Voila. And then the smile lines, or whatever these are called here, right? They really, maybe frown lines. I hate to call them smile lines. But let's Let's come in here and knock these out as best we can. And again, I'm just looking to take out some of the darkness, the overall darkness in some of these shadows, or the wrinkles, I'm sorry. The shadow that is within the wrinkle is really what I'm looking to eliminate. And you can go over it as much or as little as you like. I think I'm going to just about call it quits here in terms of wiping out wrinkles. We could go here over the cheeks, and you probably would if this was, like a client photo. I'm going to clean this stuff up around the eye right here because it's just kind of bugging me a little bit. There we go, something like that. So right off the bat, it does make her look a lot younger, albeit way, way more blurry and not very realistic. So to bring some realism back, and remember, we're calling it wrinkle reduction rather than wrinkle removal because we're going to use this good old opacity slider. And I usually knock this down to between 30 and 50%, all depending on the image. And there's before, and there's after. So it's just a very, very nice and subtle and beautiful and elegant way to go in and just help make the person age a little bit more gracefully, right? So there's her photo before, and there it is after. You just take some of those years off. Instead of looking, 60 or 70, maybe you're going to look more like late 40s, early 50s. I mean, in this case, maybe she might be in her 80s or something here. So we might be pushing her back to like her, mid to late 60s, something like that. Hey, every bit helps, right? And the difference between a 60-year-old and a 90-year-old is a difference between a 1-year-old and a 31-year-old. So it is a significant difference. So we're just reducing some of those wrinkles. And that's the way I like to do it here in Photoshop. Okay, so now that we've talked about wrinkles, let's move on to number 20. And this is all about dodging and burning, which is a super duper helpful thing to know how to do when you're working with images in Photoshop. Not only is it great for beauty portraits or fashion work in studio, but you can do amazing things with landscape photography, product photography, or just outdoor environmental portraits. Dodging and burning can be used everywhere. And traditionally in photography, it kind of has been used everywhere in terms of anywhere that a photographer can use it. So here's how we set up a simple dodge and burn. There's actually a bunch of ways to do it. I'm going to show you two of them, two of my favorites. The first one is to create two curves adjustment layers. Boom, boom. This brings us back to the retouch eye technique that I like to use, but it's a little bit different. I like to set the top curves adjustment layer to screen, and you can see it brightens the image, so naturally we're going to select the mask and hit Command or Control I to flip the white to black. And I'll select the second curves adjustment layer, and we'll set this to multiply right there. And again, with that mask, we'll go Command or Control I to flip it from white to black as well. The reason I like to do this, multiply does the darkening, screening does the brightening. I tend to like to work with my shadows first, and then come in and touch up and dust up the highlights. I'm going to shut off my screen. Well, actually, I don't even need to shut it off. It's already hidden because of the mask. I'm going to select my Multiply Curves Adjustment layer, make sure the mask is selected, and here's where it kind of gets important. Grab your brush tool, and we want to be painting with the color white, right? So white is my foreground color down here in my toolbar. I don't really care about the size or the hardness of the brush right now. I know that I can change that using my square bracket keys, or you can change the hardness by holding on Shift and using your square bracket keys, right? You see that? I don't know if you can watch the little icon or the preview up there changing as I, Shift and left bracket key versus right bracket key. Generally, you'll be working with a very soft brush. But here's the important thing. You want to make sure opacity is pretty low, not flow. Flow is like a can of spray paint. It's light at first, but as you just press and hold, it's going to make the effect more and more and more intense. Opacity forces you to sort of paint a second stroke with the brush to redouble that effect. And I find that you have way more control. So I'm going to go with 10. And it really doesn't matter painting all those extra strokes because you're working with a very soft brush and everything blends together just beautifully. Again, this is an effect that works great if you have a graphics tablet. If you don't have a graphics tablet, you can still do it with a mouse or a trackpad. I've seen amazing photographers do incredible work in retouching that don't even own a Wacom tablet. Crazy as it sounds, but it definitely can be done. All right, so we're here on our Multiply Curves Adjustment layer, and I want to make my brush a little bit smaller here. So I'm just going to make my brush a little smaller. And the key with dodging and burning is you kind of follow the shadows and highlights that are there in your image. Let me just create a new layer real quick. And I'm just going to grab my little circle tool here. And like right here, she has a highlight, right? Right here on her cheek is a highlight. On her nose, we've got these highlights running down her nose, right? She's going to have a highlight there on her chin. Here with the, around her neck and her collarbone area. Here on her shoulder, she's got a big highlight. Those are all highlights, right? Over here on her forearm, she's got this highlight here. right? But in the same vein, she also has some shadows. So the shadows are like up here underneath the flower thingy that she's got on her head, probably here at the edge of the hair where it meets her face. Underneath the nose is a shadow. The eyebrows could probably be darkened a little. Maybe the makeup around the eyes could be darkened. Right underneath the lip can be darkened. In between her teeth can be darkened. Here underneath the chin, depending on how much you want to bring that out, can be darkened. Here where the hair runs into the arm could be darkened. In between the fingers could be darkened. Right there, the shadow in between her arm and her shoulder could be darkened. And so on and so forth. Over here, if the person's wearing clothing and you want to emphasize, a set of abs, intensify the shadow beneath each ab muscle and intensify the highlight on the top of each ab muscle, and it's going to make it look like those muscles pop even more. So dodging and burning, super duper helpful. Let's just select all these ridiculous shape layers. Get them out of there, and let's go back to working on our multiply layer here. It looks like I painted a dab of white accidentally. All right, let's grab the brush tool. We're painting. White is our foreground color. I have a 100 pixel soft edge brush, and I'm going to begin working in the shadows. This is the multiply layer. So I'm just going to paint just gently here underneath her chin, and then I'm going to go up here beside the hair, right? And I'm just intensifying the shadow. I'm going to make my brush a little bit bigger, coming down this side of her hair, make the brush a little smaller. I'm going to come through over here. I'm looking to just accentuate any areas of hair to give the hair a little bit of depth. Right, just make the hair stick out a little more, maybe paint on the bottom side of this little floral wreath. That's the word I'm looking for, the word wreath. That's what she's got on her head, right? There we go. Great. I'm just looking to darken up any stuff that's already kind of dark, and we'll brighten anything that's brightened. All right, we'll intensify the shadow beside and underneath her nose. Thickening the eyebrows is almost always a good move, unless you're working with somebody who has just incredible eyebrows. We're going to intensify the shadow there underneath the mouth and between the teeth. Great. Maybe just up underneath the top lip as well. And then here on her neck, we can intensify that shadow a little bit. And we'll come over here in between her fingers and just darken up the shadows. Bring out the shadow a little there on the edge of her arm and the edge of her shoulder. And the same thing here between the fingers down here. Great. Right. And then maybe even here on the edge of her arm over here. So if I Alt-Option click that mask, you can see I almost have what looks like an outline of her face where we've kind of traced all of these shadows. And you can see that you can definitely still see like the line on the edges of all of my dodging and burning. If you want to be a complete perfectionist, you can go filter and you can blur this just a little bit, blur, Gaussian blur, and you can blur it by, you probably need to go at least 5 or 10 pixels, but you want to be careful going too big on your blur because you'll end up doing kind of more damage than good. I'll just throw a 10 pixel blur. That's totally a not necessary step, but it's just something we're throwing in there. So you may be looking at it and say, hey, did anything even change? Well, let's see. Let's shut off the burning layer. You can see, yeah, in fact, we did change stuff. We really added what looks like a lot of depth to the image. Now, I should caution you, it's very, very easy to go very overboard with dodging and burning. And you're probably just going to do it if you've never done dodging and burning, so just let it happen. And in a year or a few years, or maybe just a couple more shoots, you'll realize that, ooh, man, I really was over dodging and burning a little bit. But, subtlety is key. Subtlety works well. But sometimes, you do want to go crazy dramatic too. So just, be careful with it. All right, now we'll go in and just add to the highlights. Now, the highlights I really like to intensify, but kind of spread them out to continue the softening. So I'll paint one pass over the highlight, and then I'll make my brush bigger, and I'll paint another pass over a highlight. That just tends to help smooth the highlights out so you don't get any crazy-looking effects on the skin. We've got a very narrow highlight coming down her nose there, which we'll make sure we get that right there above her lower lip or her upper lip, and then here on her chin. Brighten the neck a little bit. We got this highlight here in the hair, which we can really intensify and just bring that highlight out beautifully. Same thing over here on the side of her hair. We have a nice highlight in her hair we can bring out. And we can just, we know the light's falling here kind of on this side of her finger, right? You can see in between the two shadowed edges. We can bring some additional light to that area, right? Voila. And then right here we can kind of see the natural highlight that occurs there on her neck. We can come down over here on this side of her arm. And you can also use dodging and burning if a part of the image is just too dark. So maybe you're looking at it and saying, you know what, no, this shadow under her chin is too dark. You could go in there and flood a little bit of additional light in there and just soften that shadow up a little bit. It really tends to work well for that kind of thing. All right, so we can come down here onto her chest and just brighten that up. Voila. And yeah, that probably looks good. We could go up into the bouquet as well, but I'm not going to in this case. So let's just zoom out. We'll shut the dodging off. There's before and there's after. So now if we shut off both layers, there's before and there's after. We've just done some dodging and burning. The cool thing about this effect is, of course, you can blur either of these layer masks and just kind of fade the effect out a little bit, or you can even select both layers, right? Select the top layer, hold down Shift, select the bottom layer, drag these down to the new layer icon, and duplicate the effect. So now we have double the dodging and burning, right? You see that? It's a little kind of crazy, just too much, takes things a little overboard. But sometimes it's interesting to experiment with. I've got this top burning, right? This is a multiply layer, right? The top layer mask for my burning, I would go like filter and we'll Gaussian blur the living daylights out of it with like a 40 pixel Gaussian blur, and go ahead and hit OK. And we'll do the same thing here to the screen, right? The screen curves layer on top. Command or Control F just reapplies the same filter, and then select both of these layers and just reduce the opacity, and mix that by selecting both of the bottom layers and just reducing the opacity of them too. So essentially what's happening is we have kind of a tighter, sharper, right? A tighter, sharper dodge and burn here on the bottom. This is the mask for the screen layer here on the bottom, and if I look at the same mask for the top, it's much more blurred. So we're kind of mixing a very soft effect with a sharper effect and just getting a nice dodge and burn overall, right? It's a nice soft, everything looks faded well into the image. You may have to go over some of the areas where the dodging or the burning overlap a background like this and just kind of make sure that those edges are cleaned up so it doesn't look like any haloing is happening. But this is one of my favorite ways to dodge and burn. There's just so much control. I'm going to group those layers together and just shut it off. I'll show you kind of a quick and dirty way to dodge and burn. It's so quick, it's so easy. It's nice to go in when you just want to like clean something up. Let's say we're looking at her face, we say it just needs a little dodging and burning. Here's how I would do that. Hold down the Alt or Option key, click on the new layer icon. It's going to trigger the new layer dialog box. From here, we'll just call this D and B for dodge and burn. I'd set the mode to soft light. That's what I like to work in. And Photoshop gives me this option, fill with soft light neutral color, aka 50% gray. Absolutely, we need that. We're going to hit OK. And you can see we get a layer that's filled with gray, yet there's nothing here. And that's because if we set this back to the normal blend mode, it is there. But gray doesn't appear with soft light or overlay. It just disappears. So when we add darkening or brightening to this gray, that'll be all that appears. So we can use the straight up dodge and burn tools in Photoshop right over here. Dodge tool, burn tool. So I'll go dodge tool, and the range of midtones is great. An exposure of between 20 and 30 is fine. I got 21 here, that's cool. And just remember that dodging is the highlights. So we're gonna be working with the highlights first, which normally I wouldn't be working with the highlights first, but I just wanna show you something here. So we can go through and we'll paint over like the highlight there on her forehead, the highlight here on her cheek, right? We'll get in there, we'll make sure we get this highlight on her nose, get here on the top of her mouth, and then over here on her chin, something like that. We'll accentuate the highlight in her hair, right? And again, this is multiple strokes, multiple passes with the dodge tool. Let's shut this off. You can see that we are making a change in there, right? You can see that lightness change in the side of her head. Now, if you don't want to have to come over here and switch to the burn tool, you can very quickly work with the burn tool by simply holding down the Alt or Option key, and the dodge tool switch to the burn tool. Now I am burning in these shadows. And to let you see that that's what's going on, just take a peek at the zoomed in DNB layer. You can see all that white we did with the dodging tool, but all the dark gray and black stuff is with the burn tool. Yet we still have the dodge tool selected over here. If you don't like the Alt or Option trick, well, of course you can go and just use the straight burn tool and go in and burn whatever needs to be burned, right? Just like that. Voila. And you have a similar dodge and burn. So that's just a nice and quick way to go in and work, and you're still technically working non-destructively, albeit not as non-destructively as with the adjustment layers, but it's fun. It's cool to be able to see that visual representation. You set that layer back to normal and you can see what you've done. And then go back to, you know, soft light or even overlay. Overlay will give you a little bit more bite on your dodge and burn, and you can dodge and burn that way as well. So a little bit of a crash course in dodge and burn, but hey, that's what we do around here. Let's talk about the next topic, and that is adding or removing tattoos or large skin blemishes. So let's take a quick break here. As I mentioned in the open to the video, if you're enjoying this video, if you think you would enjoy my course and you're willing and able to support the channel, go ahead and use the link up there and pick up a copy of my course. It's all about how to retouch images in Photoshop, get better at retouching. We cover everything from portraits to products to food, landscapes, and everything in between, if there is anything in between. With that out of the way, let's get back into this video. I'll just drop this image here into Photoshop real quick. And you know what? I think I'll just pass on the removing a tattoo. We've talked about removing skin blemishes, between frequency separation and the healing brush stuff that we've talked about. You know, going in and removing a tattoo or a large skin blemish, it's going to be different depending on every situation, but those are the tools that you would use. Let's focus on adding a tattoo and adding a realistic tattoo. A lot of times you see tattoos that have been added in Photoshop, and it's pretty obvious that it's not a real tattoo. We're going to do our best here to do a photorealistic tattoo add. Now, here in my libraries from Adobe stock, I'm going to use this koi fish tattoo artwork created in Adobe Illustrator. If I just double click it here, it's going to open it up in Adobe Illustrator. Didn't I just say that? I actually don't want to open it up in Adobe Illustrator. Let's quit Illustrator. Let's just drag it here into our document in Photoshop. There we go. And there's the piece of artwork that we want. Now, the idea is going to be, I think I want to make the tattoo going up her arm. So like the fish almost like swimming up her arm to her fingers. I don't know if it's going to look better if we go like this way with the fish. That's kind of cool. But what if we flip the old fish over, right click, flip it horizontal, and then rotate it back this way. If the fish is going this way, almost swimming, so if her hand is hanging down at her side, it would be swimming up toward her elbow. I'm not really sure. Maybe I'll go back to what I was going to do and just go with the fish swimming this way, right? Something like that should be cool. So that's the idea, is you put the fish in place, and we know, okay, here's the general tattoo that we want. In fact, I'm going to right-click onto this fish piece of artwork, and I'm going to choose Convert to Smart Object, because a smart object is just, well, it's smart, so that's what I want to work with. We want to duplicate this background layer. I'm going to hold down Alt-Option and drag a copy. Well, I can't do that. I'm going to hit Command or Control-J, and now I've got a copy of the background image. I'm going to drag it up above everything, and we want to make a black and white version of this photo. So I'm going to use the hotkey Command-Shift-U, that's Control-Shift-U on the PC, and it gives me a simple black and white, but not enough contrast. So let's go Image Adjustments Levels. And again, we're working super non-destructively for something like this. Don't worry, because we're just creating what's called a displacement map. We're going to drag the black handle in, something like that, and then we'll drag the white point over as well. Look at what a little bit of contrast does to a black and white photo. Is that not remarkable? There's before just with the standard desaturation, and there's with a little contrast. Wow. We're going to hit OK there, and this is going to be our displacement map. Let's go File, Save As, and we're going to save it right to our desktop. Just choose desktop, and we're going to save it as Displace. Now, I'm working with a TIFF file, so I want to make sure down here under Format, I need this to be a Photoshop file, a .psd. There we go. I'm saving it right to the desktop. Go ahead and choose Save, hit OK, and we are going to have our displacement map. Now, I can just straight up delete that black and white layer if I so choose. Before we really do anything in terms of making the fish look like it blends in, let's apply this displacement map by going Filter, Distort, Displace. The idea of a displacement map is that you're going to take the light values of the image and kind of shade and bend and distort the graphic or image you're applying the displacement map to make it look like it belongs on that surface. In this case, we want this fish graphic to almost have the distortion as if it's being wrapped around her arm. That's where the displacement map is going to help us. I'm going to set the H and V scale, horizontal vertical scale here to 10. A displacement map stretch to fit, and repeat edge pixels is perfect. We're not really that close to an edge here, but well, I guess we kind of are down there, but whatever. Hit OK, and Photoshop's going to say, hey, what displacement map would you like to use? Well, I just saved one to the desktop, of course, so we're going to choose that and hit Open, and you're going to see it just gives us a little twist on the artwork, just like that. It all looks good. Well, it all looks good except for this little area here that got all mucked up right there. And that area, as you can tell, is going to be on her arm. So what we'll do here is just choose to paint away part of the smart filters by selecting the smart filter mask, and we'll grab our brush tool, make sure we're painting with the foreground color set to black, set the opacity of this to 100%. We need a bit of a smaller brush, so let's just size our brush down using the angle or the square bracket keys, and I'm just going to paint away a little bit here until that kind of that piece of artwork looks like it's pulled back into line a little bit. So there we go. And you can see one of the other things that this placement map is doing is it's really making all the edges of our artwork very rough, kind of as it would be. You can see how smooth the artwork is where I erase the displacement map, and everywhere else it's like super rough, because that's kind of how it would be if it's sitting in your skin, right? I'm going to paint that displacement map back onto the bit of blue out here that's not really being affected. All right, I'm going to zoom back out. Let me just fix that little piece of artwork that I think will be pretty obvious if we don't. And now what we've got to do is go ahead and mask this guy onto the arm. But, you know, actually, maybe before we mask it, we'll kind of try to make it blend a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and mask it. So let's apply this Well, no, I'm not going to apply anything. We're going to set a blend mode here of overlay. This is a pretty colorful tattoo, and you can see right away setting it to overlay is really going to allow, number one, and most importantly, the texture of the skin to show through, but we are still getting the color of the tat. By the way, this effect should work fairly well on just a standard black and white tattoo as well. If you have something that's solid black, you may need to do something like reduce the opacity a little bit just to really make sure you're getting some of that skin texture through there. But between a displacement map and, lowering the opacity, I'm talking maybe 5-10% at most, you should be able to see a bit of skin texture in there. This looks good for how it is, and I think before I apply anything else, I am going to mask this in. So we're going to begin getting rid of all the stuff that shouldn't be there. What we need to do is apply or place a layer mask onto this koi fish layer. So just boom, add a new layer mask, hitting the new layer mask icon down there. And again, this is going to be a place where having a graphics tablet, a Wacom tablet, or any graphics tablet of your choosing is going to be so super helpful, because we're going to take the brush tool and we're going to rough this whole thing in first. I'm going to use my square bracket keys to make my brush a little bit bigger, hit the letter X to flip my foreground and background colors, and I'm just going to paint away the stuff that's out here, right? We shouldn't see any of this. We just have the tattoo on our arm. And then I'm just going to come over roughly. I don't care if I paint the tattoo away on our arm. The whole point is to rough this in. Let's just get a rough idea of how this is going to look, and we'll do all the edge cleaning up in just a moment. And of course, you can use any number of the selection techniques that we've learned thus far in this tutorial, of course. But in this case, we're gonna go back old school here, and we're gonna do this by hand, because for something like this, it might just, every edge is so soft. I think this might just be the best way to go here. All right, so we rough this in, and you can see if we zoom out, we have the tattoo over her hand, yet not masked into the exact edges. And we would come in here with the brush tool, hit the letter X to flip foreground and background. So now we're painting with white. I do have a soft edge brush, and I'm gonna come into here and just paint this in nice and quickly. And you can see it'll go pretty quick for you, especially if you have a graphics tablet. It's really not that difficult. And like right up here, this is just such a soft edge that it's very advantageous to be able to just use your brush and paint over it and just paint away and paint this tattoo in. And if you paint too much of it, flip your foreground and background color using the letter X and paint away areas that shouldn't be there. So there we go. I'll hold the letter R. I'll rotate my image. And we're going to just come right through here. Voila. Alrighty, cool. So something just like that. I might have sped it up there just to breeze through that. But you can see already it looks pretty cool. I mean, it's looking like it's blending in kind of like it should be. This is super distracting up here, right? So well, number one, it's got to be blended a little bit better. Let's make sure we paint that all the way to the edge of the finger, because that's going to be quite noticeable. But also, that little jump in my displacement map is kind of annoying. All right, let's paint that junk away. Let's try to get it to the point where it kind of sort of meets up again. Maybe we'll take it to the edge of the finger, just like that. Right, something like so. There we go. Something like that should be cool. Let's zoom back out. There we go. That's much, much better. It looks a little bit more natural rather than having a very obvious jog on the back of her finger. And we want to make a couple more changes here to this, as well as build out the filters that we've applied a little bit. So first and foremost, we're going to add a levels adjustment layer. So I'm going to come up here to my adjustments panel. I'm going to choose levels. We've already used levels before, right? We talked about it. We're going to clip this to just the tattoo artwork, just to the tattoo artwork. Command Option G, that would be Control Alt G on the PC. And what we want to do is probably darken the whole thing a little bit. So just drag the center point over toward the white a little bit, something like that. And then I'm going to boost the output white, which is going to kind of knock down the brightness of the brightest parts of the tattoo. Just kind of something like that is cool. And maybe even lift the blacks just a little bit, right? Just a little bit. Maybe we'll move the output up to about 20. I got it at 19. That looks pretty good. Something like that is cool. I thought for a second about going into the channels. I don't think I'll go there quite yet. I'm going to add a vibrance adjustment layer here and clip that as well. Command Option or Control Alt G. And we could try both boosting the vibrance or reducing the vibrance and see what we like. I actually think I like the reduction of vibrance. Now, remember, we're not necessarily looking to make the tattoo look realistic as though it's a tattoo you're looking at hanging on the wall. Every piece of anything you add to an image, like this tattoo in this image, it has to be realistic based upon the context of the rest of the image. This image has kind of a faded overall look, therefore the tattoo really shouldn't look super crisp and sharp, right? If we didn't do anything to this, this is just, it's out of place. It's very obviously out of place because it's too bright, it's too saturated, it's too contrasty. We need to kind of dull things down and make it look more like it belongs in the photo which we've placed it. So in addition to all this, I'm going to zoom in a little bit. One of the things that I really love is that we can see some of the skin texture right through this tattoo. I want to take it a step further. Let's go to the tattoo layer, right? The koi fish tattoo layer right there. And we're going to go layer style, blending options, and I'm going to use here the blend if sliders. I don't know if you've ever messed around with these, but basically what I want to do is hold down my Alt or Option key and split the white point here for the underlying layer. You split it just by holding on the Alt or Option key and clicking on it. Click on the split piece and just start dragging it toward the middle. You can see how it's making the tattoo disappear. That's too much. We only want to pull it over a little bit. Basically what that's going to do is fade the artwork in areas that have a lot of highlights. So we're just going to try to make the skin shine through a little bit more in all the little highlighty areas of the arm. So something like that is probably cool. And we could try going and getting rid of some of the artwork in the shadowy parts of the image as well. You can see if I grab this whole black point and drag it, you can see how the artwork starts to totally disappear from the shadows altogether. So maybe not quite what we want to do, right? In fact, really not at all what we want to do. We could try Alt or Option splitting that and drag that over. We'll see if it looks at all like it should. If not, we just won't even mess around with it. Now, I don't think it's really going to work. We're just going to hit OK. We're going to be content with our original blend if slider, kind of giving us a little bit more of a pop in the highlights of the arm. So now I think to really mix things up a little bit, we're going to blur this a little. But watch what happens if I apply a blur, right? I open up my smart filters. I can just go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, and it doesn't need to be a lot of blur. You know, maybe, say 40 pixels, that's no good. Maybe like 2 pixels, and we blur the tattoo, except for the areas that we masked away. Remember, we have these 2 little bits of black here in the mask for our smart filter, so we need to work around this somehow. Let's cancel this because I want everything to have a uniform blur. I don't want it to look pixel perfect. That would not be all that good. So we're going to sort of group this smart object within another smart object by right-clicking and choosing Convert to Smart Object. So it's going to wrap our tattoo with the mask into a smart object, and we can apply, well, we can apply any smart filters we like to this now. Filter, we'll go Blur, Gaussian Blur, and we'll be able to blur the whole bit. We don't want to go 40 pixels. Let's go with like 2. I think 2 is going to work here for this. Yep, that looks great. Go ahead and hit OK, and we've got our nice little 2-pixel blur. You can see there's before, there's after. We can also do something like add a little grain to it as well. Filter, noise, add a little bit of noise. But we really want to try to keep this pretty low. So I'm going to zoom in here. You can see here if we add a ton of noise, it really does a lot of bad things. Probably about 5% like it was is probably going to be good. Just going to help accentuate the skin texture a little bit. 5% actually might be a little bit too much, maybe 3. Yeah, 3. That looks better, especially in the shadows there. It looks a lot better. Gaussian, perfect, and very important. You want to make sure you check on monochromatic. Go ahead and hit OK, and we're going to zoom out. So the tattoo's looking pretty good. We still need to match the color a little bit more, though. So I'm going to come up here to the top of my adjustment layers, and we're going to add a selective color adjustment right there, selective color. I'm going to clip this to the layers beneath it, Command-Option-G, that'd be Control-Alt-G on the PC, and I think I'm most interested in working in the blacks here from the colors. You'll need to get down to blacks. The reason I'm saying blacks is, like here between the fingers, that's unnaturally dark red, right? We need to suck some of the red out of the shadows. So here, we're going to boost the cyans in the darker parts of this tattoo. Something like that. You can see there's before, there's after. Still not doing quite what I want. Maybe if we take, oh, no, we don't want to take magenta away. If anything, we'll push a little magenta into it. That actually looks really nice. Let's try taking some yellow away or boosting yellow. I think actually take a couple clicks of yellow away. That's pretty cool. And then I think I might actually try to reduce the blacks of the shadow, like make it not quite so rich black in the areas of the tattoo that are black. I think that really adds a nice realistic element to it, right? There's before, there's after. You can see just a subtle change, but a change nonetheless. Let's go to neutrals here. I think, again, I want to boost the cyans and therefore reduce the reds a little bit. So we're going to boost cyan. And let me just try reducing. No, not reducing magenta. If anything, again, a couple clicks of magenta. And probably not more yellow. We'll probably take a little bit of yellow out as well. And in this case, I might actually increase... Well, you know what? No, I probably won't increase the blacks. Actually, get rid of a little bit of the blacks. So about negative 6% there. That looks good. And again, if we zoom out, we can see there's before, there's after. So it makes a huge, huge difference. It can really make it can really be the difference, I should say, between your tattoo looking realistic or not. You can use a whole myriad of different colorizing techniques. You could try using the color channels and levels. You could use a color balance adjustment layer. But selective color for me, when you're working with artwork like this, where you're going from artwork created in Illustrator that's very blocky and lots of solid colors to a photo where it's lots of smooth gradation of color, Selective artwork's a nice way to kind of say, look, all those darkest elements in that artwork, I need you to be a little bit more yellow or a little bit more blue or whatever it may be, and that just tends to work out nicely. And last but not least, you could go over this and just dodge and burn it a little bit more. So you could go in and just increase the shadow between the fingers, for instance. I think this image would really stand to boost by just darkening those shadows a little bit more. In fact, let's just go ahead and throw a soft light layer, go ahead and hit OK. Oh, we didn't fill it with 50% gray. We can go Edit Fill and just choose from the Contents menu here, 50% gray, hit OK. The layer's already set to soft light. We can go ahead and grab our Dodge and Burn tools. I want Burn, and I'm going to just burn between the fingers there, right? Just to make sure I have a nice shadow built there, and maybe even here the shadows in the back of her arm. And what we're doing is we're essentially boosting what the displacement filter is already doing, but we can kind of see exactly where we want to boost things. Whereas with displacement, it was more of a, hey, let's get this project started off on the right foot. Hold on the Alt or Option key. Let's just add a little highlight to the top of the fingers there. And there's a really pronounced highlight coming down the back of her thumb. And maybe, yeah, we'll just add a highlight there down the back of her forearm where it kind of should be as well. So you can see there's before dodging and burning. There's after dodging and burning. Just helps kind of bring things out a little bit more. And again, hold on the Alt or Option key and let's click on the eyeball for the original image. There's the original image. And there is the added tattoo. Now, if you still don't think it looks realistic, you can select all of your tattoo layers, Command or Control G, group them together, and name it tattoo, and then just toy with reducing the opacity a little bit, right? Then you allow the natural flesh color to come back through a little bit more, and that should really give you a nice, realistic tattoo, again, based upon the actual image that you're looking to add the tattoo to. And here, just because I can, I threw another one together with the tattoo rotated the other way, with the fish kind of going down her arm with the tail and whatnot up by her fingers. So you get a couple different examples of adding this tattoo here in Photoshop, and you can see I did it a slightly different way. I tweaked my levels and vibrance and selective color a little differently, and sure enough, it looks a little different as well. So that is adding a realistic tattoo in Photoshop, something that can be a lot of fun to do. I'm going to just close this, and I'm going to close this as well. So that, my friends, is how you add a realistic tattoo, but let's move along without further ado to the 22nd thing, and that is replacing a sky. And I intentionally picked a rather difficult image. You can see I got all these little bits of foliage and whatnot sticking up out of the top of these trees as if to give me its own sort of woody middle finger as I try to extract this sky and replace it with another sky. Now, again, we've gone over a lot of the select and mask and, the quick selection tools and different quick mask, stuff like that. If you have a very simple selection, hey, just create a selection as you would, and you can skip right to where we actually add the clouds. But if you have a difficult selection like this, let's explore a technique called luminosity masks and how that can help us very quickly, might I add, get a very complex selection of the edges of these trees. We're going to head over here to the channels panel. If you've never opened channels before, well, you can be scared of them, but not for this part of the tutorial. What we want to do is we can just look through our channels real quick, and I'm looking for contrast between, like the foreground here, which I want to be dark, and the background up here, which should be a bit lighter. I want contrast between the two things. Again, the edge that I'm interested in is contrast between the tips of my trees and the white or blue of the sky. That's the most important thing. Everything down here can pound sand, quite frankly, because that's going to be easy to we could take a lasso and just select all that stuff. It's the edge of the trees that's most important. So I like the blue channel. We're going to use the blue channel. We're going to just click and drag and drop it down here on the new channel icon. And it's very important to do that, by the way, because you don't want to open up levels and start messing with the actual channels that make up your image. You'll quickly mess up your photo and have to close everything and hopefully not save it. And then just reopen the image and restart everything. So duplicate that channel. And we're going to name this channel Sky Selection, right? Might not make a lot of sense, but you can think of new channels as saved selections. And that's exactly what we're going to create. The white stuff is going to be selected. The black stuff won't be selected. And let's take it for a test run. Command or Control click on the channel thumbnail, and you can see we do get a selection. Let's hit the little eyeball here to turn our RGB composite channel back on. We're going to get this crazy red overlay. Ignore that for a second. Hit the eyeball here associated with sky selection to hide that channel. It's going to make all that red nonsense go away. Select by clicking on the RGB channel. Make sure we're working on our composite RGB channel. Go back to the layers panel, and we could just, throw, hue saturation in here and go colorize and just, add like some crazy purple effect, right? We can tell that majority of what's selected here is the sky, but we're definitely getting like a lot of purple down here in this church and in the highlights on the roof of the little red building and, down here in the little stream and everywhere that's kind of light. So that's not quite a honed selection. It's heading there, but it's not quite there. Let's go back to channels. Let's turn our sky selection back on. And in fact, let's hide the composite RGB channel. So we're working just on this alpha channel. We see blacks and whites and everything in between, every form of gray in between. This is actually going to be a little easier than you think, because what we're going to do is go Image, Adjustments, Levels. We can apply a levels adjustment directly to a channel. What I want to do is these, remember we learned how to read a histogram back in, what was it, I can't remember if it was part 1 or 2, it was one of them. In one of the 2 other videos, we learned how to read a histogram. This is the darker bits in this image. And then we got not much of anything going on here until we get to the very bright parts of the image. So I know that all of this stuff here, that's the sky. And over here, this is the foreground. Now, I want to make the foreground as close to solid black as I can. So I'm going to take my black input point right here, and I'm going to drag it over to the other side of this part of the histogram. Whoop, just like that. And look at how close to solid black the majority of the foreground becomes. Why didn't the church become black as well? Well, because, remember, the church is very light. So the church probably falls somewhere over in the range of here. This is probably where all those pixels for the church are. And if we make that solid black, well, then we start making the sky black as well. See, the church goes away, but look at how dark the sky is. We don't have much contrast between the tops of the trees and the sky. And that's the most important thing. So let's just make the foreground very dark. And if the foreground gets dark, well, it just makes sense that the sky would get brighter, right? So take the white point and drag it over toward the sky. We want to be careful. We don't want to kind of push it too far because the edge and the tops of the trees will start to look too kind of crunchy. I'm going to grab my middle gray point and I'm going to open up the highlights a little bit more. Right? Just kind of something maybe like that. Go ahead and hit OK. All right, now we're cooking with fire, right? Now we've got a great contrasty edge. It's still not quite solid white up there. It's more of a very light gray. Don't worry. And we've got all this white down here in the foreground. Let's take care of the white in the foreground first. Grab your brush tool, a huge brush, black, right? We're going to set the mode of the brush to normal. We've got an opacity of 100%, great. And we're just going to go through and paint over all this stuff in the foreground, right? What did I tell you? This stuff was going to be so easy to select, right? We're not really concerned about this down here. We can paint all this away, and even there goes the church. Goodbye, centerpiece of the photo. I'm going to use my square bracket keys and size my brush downward a little bit, and there we go. I'm actually not even concerned about the white being there in the tips of the trees, because if the tips of the trees reflect or look like they reflect a little bit of the blue in the sky, it's actually not going to look bad. Number one, you're hardly going to notice it, because number two, it's actually kind of natural for something to take and reflect the light that's being pointed onto it. Now what we need to do is make the sky a bit more white. Now, I don't want to use the normal blend mode. I want to use either overlay or soft light. So I'm going to use soft light. Now, this is the blend mode for the brush tool. And what this is going to do, look, see, I'm painting with black now. We want to paint with white. If I'm painting with white, see, I can paint out here, and I'm making all the white stuff a little bit whiter, and then, whoop, I paint over the black, but look, nothing really happens because it's set to soft light. So it's simply intensifying the color that you're painting over with the color that you have selected as your foreground color. So in this case, the white is going to intensify every lighter than 50% gray color very, very nicely. In fact, it would do it with darker than 50% gray colors as well. But in terms of messing with the solid black, it's not really going to be able to do much of anything. So I'm going to paint over the sky, one pass, and I'll probably paint over the sky again with another pass, right? Just like this. We really want the sky to be pretty close to solid white. We've got this little hill here in the foreground. I'm not too concerned if that gets covered up. I'm replacing the sky, and the clouds are so enveloping that hill that I think to make it look realistic is going to be pretty difficult. But we got some tricks up our sleeve. We'll still try a thing or two. And I'm going to paint over the sky yet another time with this soft light brush. And I think at this point we'll be close enough to solid white to really get us a realistic sky. And if you wanted, obviously you could go over this as many times as you want, get it as close to solid white as you can. And if you really don't like how bright the tips of the trees got, I know I kind of brushed it with a pass of white accidentally, set your foreground color back to black and just paint over it with black and just kind of, darken up what would show some of those highlights a little bit. But this should be a great little selection for us, just like this. In fact, I'm going to go right along the edge of the trees one more time and just kind of clean that up just a little bit. All right, turn on the RGB composite channel, select the RGB composite channel. We can shut off the sky selection channel. We have, in theory, our channel. We'll see how good or bad it looks in just a moment. Let's go to the layers panel. Up here in libraries, I have a new sky that I grabbed from our friends at Adobe Stock, stock.adobe.com. Great service. I'm going to drag this into this photo. You can see the sky is a little undersized. I'm not too terribly concerned about that. And I'm going to hold down my Shift key, stretch the sky out, kind of like that. That looks good. Maybe nudge it over a little bit. Cool. Now we're going to mask it to the sky. We go back to channels. We hold down our Command or Control key and click on the thumbnail for the sky selection channel. Go back to the layers panel, and here's the moment of truth. Layer, layer mask, reveal selection. And there we go. We have applied the sky to this photo. Now, maybe the sky's not the most realistic in terms of colors and things like that, and we want to do a little bit more blending in all likelihood, but you can see we got great detail along the tops of the trees, really looking nice there. Could be a little bit more perfect, but again, we did this super, super quickly, but we're still not finished, so, you know, don't throw your hands up in despair if you don't like exactly how it's turning out. You can try different blend modes. Something like multiply works really nicely, especially if you're looking to intensify a sunset photo. In this case, I don't really like the way it looks all that much. We could try something like hard light. Hard light tends to work really nicely. Look at how realistic that looks. And oh, by the way, we're bringing our little friend the mountain back into play here. We are also bringing in the massive bank of clouds along the sky. So if we didn't like that, then we probably won't like hard light. But we are adding a lot of color and tone and clouds to the sky and making it look like such an idyllic day. We could go and try something like overlay, and overlay actually might work even better than a hard light. You can try all kinds of things. Screen, that's going to really blow it out, but this kind of looks like more what you would expect from a camera, right? A very, very bright sky. If your foreground is this exposed and, you know, high noon, middle of autumn type day. I actually think I like overlay. So we would roll with overlay in this case. And, you know, there we go. We've replaced the sky. So there's the image we brought in. We replaced the sky with something like this. And that's pretty much all she wrote. Certainly, you can see the power of a luminosity mask and creating a selection in general based upon a channel. So a lot of really great stuff there in the channels panel, and a lot of stuff we didn't even get to. But creating channel-based selections is incredibly powerful. All right, so let's move along to number 23, and this is color correction in Photoshop. Now, I know earlier on in part 1, we did talk about color correction in the Camera Raw editor, but let's talk about beasting it here in Photoshop and some of the different methods we can use here. I'm going to collapse my libraries panel. I've got this photo of this little church building, which right off the bat does look like it has a color and contrast kind of cast, well, color cast, and the contrast is a little janky as well. Let's talk about how we would correct this. Let's add a curves adjustment layer. I do almost all of my color correcting using curves here in Photoshop. And basically what we want to do is look for a white point. Now, this image is pretty easy, right? Because you say, oh, well, the side of the church, the side of the house, that should be white. It should be devoid of all color. So let's take our little center gray sampler, right? And just click kind of anywhere on the side of the church. Let's go with like right there. And you can see when we do this, we get an image now that, well, it's got kind of a heavy purple color cast. So let's undo that. Let's say, you know, maybe that side of the church didn't work. Maybe we got to go with like this side of the church, right? Something like that. But we still get a pretty crazy purple color cast. So looking at the image, I can tell, for instance, that a ton of the purple color cast is really coming from the shadows, right? All these gravestones have a heavy purple cast. The sort of crevices here on the hillside and the trees, heavy purple color cast. Let's use the black eyedropper. We've already used the gray eyedropper. And just say, you know what? Let's make this a pure black point. So I'm going to click up there in the shadows, and wow, look at that. We just neutralized all that purple. It's almost like it's magic. And then I'll take the white color dropper just because I can and say, you know what? Looks like there's a highlight here on the flashing on the edge of this roof. Let me click on that and see what happens. And that neutralizes even more of what was a crazy color shift. I'm going to just park my curves and we can go look at before and after. It is not a huge color shift, but it is enough of a color shift that a correction really does help our image. And at this point, we can go in and, you know, add a little, you know, contrast. Maybe with levels, we say, hey, let's boost the contrast a little bit, maybe make it a little brighter, and tone down the brightness of the overall highlights. And voila, we have our image. There's before, there's after, something like that, and we clean the image right up. Nice little color correction, courtesy of the automatic color correction features there within the curves panel. So let's talk about another method of color correction, and we've got here a studio photo, and we can know right off the bat there's not a ton to select from. If she was holding a gray card, hey, that'd be great, but she's not. We do, however, have this silver chain link stuff, which we should maybe be able to select from. It is going to reflect a lot of color. She is wearing black, though, so that makes things easier, but she does also have this watch. Now, this technique can really be used with any photo. It can be used with a landscape photo, with a portrait in studio, out of studio, wherever. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to find kind of the best gray point from which to sample by holding down our Alt or Option key and selecting the new layer icon, choosing to set this layer to a blend mode of soft light. And we're also going to go with the fill with soft light neutral color. Boom, check that on. Hit OK. And now we have this gray layer. We're going to set this layer to a blend mode of difference. Go with difference. You can see everything looks, well, definitely looks different, right? And we're going to apply or add a threshold adjustment layer above this, right? There's threshold. And we're going to back the threshold level down pretty low until we don't see much black at all, right? So something like that. And we can see the first bits of black that appear are right here on the side of the watch, maybe 2 little bits there, substantial black. There is black all over the chain link stuff, but not really enough. And also here, maybe up in the shadow of her, the little top had a strap going over her shoulder. I'm going to roll with the watch, though, because I'm a little more confident in the watch being kind of what it should be. Let's take one of these big blobs of black. We're going to use our eyedropper tool. I'm going to hold down my Shift key, and we're going to drop a sample point right on that spot of black. I can select my threshold layer, hold down Shift, select my gray layer, and hit the little trash can icon to get rid of those, and I have my eyedropper in perfect place. All right, so there's my overall image. Now we just we go with the layers, or levels adjustment layer, or a curves adjustment layer. I'm going to go with curves because curves is my thing. I'm going to grab the middle gray, so the middle gray eyedropper. I'm going to zoom back in down there on that little sample point. Zoom away in, make sure I'm getting right in there on the sample point, and I'm just going to click, bing. Now I'm going to zoom back out, and what I have is a fully color-corrected photo with that whole orange-green color cast gone. It might look extreme at first glance because our eyes kind of got used to looking at the very orangey photo, but the more you look at the fully color-corrected version, you can tell, for instance, the tones in her face look much more natural, right, than without it, where the tones in her face look very, very yellow and orange. Not so good. So that's another nice way to go in and be able to quickly color correct. Now, if you're looking for more advanced color correction, I do have a few tutorials dedicated to color correction in Photoshop. There's a ton to know about it in color correcting skin and images overall. There's so much you can do with color correction in Photoshop. It really is quite magnificent. So moving right along to number 24 in our list of 30 plus techniques that you just need to know, we're going to talk about targeting individual colors with ease, speed, and precision here in Photoshop. And before us, I have an absolutely beautiful picture of Mount Adams, all those mountains out west, out specifically in the Pacific Northwest, the Mount Rainiers, the Mount Hood, Mount Adams, all up there in Washington and Oregon. So beautiful, so amazing. Love that part of the United States. Let's say we want to select this and make the greens and all these evergreen and juniper and fir trees and everything we got going on here in the foreground a little bit more green, but we don't really need to mess with the mountain too much in the back. We are going to call upon the hue saturation adjustment to do this. Now I'm going to add a hue saturation adjustment layer right up there. And we can do a number of things. First and foremost, we can simply choose like, hey, greens, right? Let's just make them more saturated. But sometimes that's not all encompassing enough. For instance, you can see I'm making like the green on the side of the mountains a bit more green, right? Very speckled. And the green here in the front of the trees a bit more green. But like, what about the stuff in the pasture? It's not becoming as green as it should be. So we can do a number of things. We can use this little sort of like expand color targeting slider down here at the bottom to say, hey, look, I want more of the yellows to be involved. And now when I boost the saturation, you can see much more of the grass is involved. In fact, I could say like, hey, grass, I want you to be more like brown, right? And maybe up here in the side of the mountain, we're getting too close to the teals and blues. And so I can just kind of push that stuff back off, right? I can just slide this over a little bit. Let's go with something like that. So I can shift the hue any which way I like. I could make it a little bit brighter, make it a little bit darker, something like that. Maybe a little darker actually kind of serves us well. And you know, boost the saturation a little. And we go with a little before and after. And we've targeted those greens with relative ease in this photo. Let's add another hue saturation adjustment and say we want to target the blues up in the sky. Now this is all without using something like color range. We could use color range and select and create a mask here. Maybe we'll try that. Maybe not. Probably not. But we can use the little finger scrubby tool too. And when we do that, Photoshop's going to do its best to select that range of colors. So I can just select the sky, and all it's going to do is edit the saturation of it. So you can see the saturation slider going hog wild. If we hold down, I believe it's the Command or Control key, yeah, there it is, we can adjust the hue of what we're looking at. So maybe we can make that a little bit more purple if we so wish. And again, we can come in here and just tweak and expand what we're looking at and say, you know what, I really want this to be you know, just a little, we want to be a little more all-encompassing, or maybe we want to just narrow things up a little bit. We can do that as well. So there's before, there's after, and maybe really we should darken that as well while we're in here and messing around with this too. Something like that looks cool, and we can just shut these adjustment layers off. There's before and there's after. So we've gone and we've targeted the areas we want to adjust. Now, this is maybe a little bit of an abstract, you know, hey, it's a landscape photo. I went in, I cleaned up what I wanted to clean up. What about a real hardcore practical example of how this can be used? Well, with something like sunburn, of course. We could go hue saturation. We could say, hey, look, take the finger scrubby slider and click on the sunburn. And we could say, look, reduce the saturation of the sunburn. Wow, that looks pretty crazy cool, right? And then we need to reduce the saturation of it. We did that. And then we want to use our Command or Control key and change the hue of the sunburn, make it a little bit more yellow. And then, of course, probably brighten it up a little bit as well until it comes very close to matching the skin around it. Add a little bit more saturation back into that thing. And it's not quite as all-encompassing as it should be. I think we should get a little bit more of the yellows here involved. Maybe take the purples. Well, the purples, there's not going to be much purple in the skin anyway. But let's just go ahead and reduce that saturation even a little tiny bit more. Maybe reduce the brightness of the whole thing. And just look at a quick before and after. So an extreme case of sunburn. And it's not quite as perfect as I would like it, but it sure is darn close, right? I mean, when you got that before and that after, that's really nice. And you can obviously go in and spend as much time as you like and fine-tune it and tweak it. We could go directly into the reds channel, for instance, and say, you know what, we just need to suck some of those reds out of there. And, oh, you know what, we need to probably also make the red, yeah, a little bit more orange. We could go into the yellows as well, and we could push the yellows around a little bit. I don't really want to mess too much with the yellows because the rest of the skin is also going to have some yellow in it. But something like that, I think will do the trick for us, and we can close the properties panel for hue saturation. Again, there's before, there is after. Take a little bit more than 45 seconds to mess with your sunburn, and you'll get a really, really great result. So that's a little bit about how you target individual colors and color areas and even edit them specifically with hue saturation here in Photoshop. All right, so moving along, number 25. And really not to be forgotten amongst all of the cool things we're covering is just creating a simple black and white photo, right? A little bit earlier, we took a look at creating that displacement mask, and we know that adding some saturation, or adding some contrast, I should say, is going to be very helpful to creating a beautiful black and white photo. Let's take a couple examples here. I'm going to duplicate this background layer 1, 2, 3 times. We're going to try 4 different methods of black and white, I think, or something like that. The first is just a simple image, adjustments, desaturate, right? This is what we looked at before. It's a very just kind of blasé, general black and white. And oh, by the way, look at this perfect example. See all this banding out here in the background? You won't get that kind of effect if you're working with a 16-bit image. This is an 8-bit image. We're working, of course, in 8-bit mode. It's just a JPEG I got as a stock photo from our friends at Adobe Stock. That kind of thing won't happen. In order to combat that, we would need to add a little bit of noise and grain to this image to help smooth that out a little bit. Not blurring, but a little bit of noise is what we need. All right, so that's the first kind of way to create a black and white image. I'm going to Alt-Option, double-click on that layer, and we're just going to name this layer Desat. Next up, what I'm going to do is use a black and white adjustment layer. See right here, we got black and white adjustment layer. I love this technique. This is really cool. This allows us to come in and adjust what we need to adjust based upon a bunch of different color channels. So if we want to brighten up our skin a little bit, probably in our skin there's a lot of red and there's a lot of yellow, right? So we can really brighten up our skin. Maybe we want to reduce greens. There's not really too much green. There's not really too much cyan. There's not really too much blue, and yeah, there's not really too much magenta either. So we don't have a ton of functionality. I can use the little finger scrubby slider and select down in here and say, look, make that part of the image a little bit darker and try to pull some more brightness back into the skin. But it can be a battle going back and forth. That being said, something like the black and white adjustment layer is super duper useful with something like a landscape photo, because very quickly you can target that sky and make it very dark or a little bit brighter depending on what you need. Trees are obviously going to fall in your greens and yellows, and your sky is going to fall into your cyans, blues, and when it comes around sunset, magenta. But I don't know a lot of people that like, black and white sunset photos. So black and white adjustment layer, incredibly helpful for that. So there's our black and white adjustment layer. Let's turn on another copy of this photo. Another way that I like to create a black and white is using the channel mixer. The channel mixer is pretty cool because it does have a monochrome option, and we can slide these little sliders around, and we can create kind of a dynamic black and white that's created a little bit differently than any other way you can create a black and white here in Photoshop. And of course, with any of these black and white options, you will probably throw like a levels or curves adjustment layer and increase the contrast a little bit just to really get the kind of black and white that you want. So that's a nice sharp looking black and white photo. In fact, to be fair, hold in the Alt-Option key. Let's drop some contrast on our black and white layer, black and white image. So you can see very similar, but not quite the same. We got a little bit more jump on our highlights with the channel mixer. And then probably my favorite way to create a black and white photo is using a combination of a gradient map and a curves layer or levels to add contrast. So use a gradient map, and it's a simple black to white gradient. The reason I like this is because not only can we just use a black to white gradient, but we could also double click on the black stop, and we could make the black maybe just like a very dark gray, which gives us a little bit more of kind of a retro looking black and white, just lifting those shadows a tiny, tiny bit. Now you probably want to do the lifting of the shadows after you add contrast, because obviously adding contrast, we're going to crunch those shadows back down. So let's add some dark to this. Let's pull a little bit more brightness into the highlights, something like that. We could even pop the highlights just a little bit, or we could flatten the highlights a little if the image calls for that. This image does not, though. So let's pop the highlights, maybe increase the shadows just a touch, and we can see there's the channel mixer, there's the gradient map, but of course the gradient map has that lifted black point, so to be fair, let's go with a straight black and white gradient. And there we go, black and white gradient, probably a little bit too much contrast with curves, so we could back that off just a little bit. So there is a gradient map black and white, there's a channel mixer black and white, there's a black and white adjustment layer black and white, and a desaturate, just straight desaturate black and white. So you can see how low contrast this is, which is nice because you have a lot of detail in your shadows, but it's really not how you want to create your finished black and white. I mean, look at the difference between that black and white and that black and white. Huge difference. So the cool thing about this is we can take these adjustment layers, right? I could take the gradient map and the curves, and I could drag them over to another photo of like this guy, and we convert him to a black and white image. Maybe I don't think that's a black and white treatment that really suits the image. Let's go with the channel mixer and see what that looks like. Drop that in place, turn these bad boys on, and now he's a black and white. Maybe there's too much contrast. I can reduce the opacity of the levels adjustment until I get just the amount of contrast that I need, or I can come in and just kind of darken the overall image down. Probably don't want to use constant too much, wrong slider. Just use some of these other sliders here, darken things down as needed, and brighten up what needs to be brightened, and get the black and white that you so desire. So a lot of different ways to create black and white images in Photoshop. Those are 4 different techniques. I almost always end up going with a channel mixer and levels, or a gradient map and curves type of mix-up, mash-up. But you can really do anything you like, and it all depends on the image. Sometimes you might want a super low contrast black and white photo. It's just going to fit the project you're working on. Hey, go for it. Or you could go with a treatment like this and then reduce the contrast with something like levels by just dragging in the output level and dragging down the white output level, and you get an even lower contrast black and white than you get with desaturate. So a ton of options there for us when it comes to creating black and white photos in Photoshop. All right, so up to 26, number 26 on a list of techniques you ought to know. This is a little bit more than just a single technique, but rather a little kind of, I don't know, a little fireball of techniques all bundled into one. This is going to be cutting out an object or a person. We've already talked about select and mask, which is what we're going to use. We'll breeze through that quickly. But then matching the color. So we'll take this girl off of the studio backdrop, and we'll put her in this photo and do our best to match the color a bit. So she and the image kind of meld together a little bit, and kind of how that works and pushing that stuff together. So with this photo, we'll begin, of course, with our quick selection tool, and I'll just drag a selection over her, drag it down her body, grab the legs. We're going to get her arm out here. Some of the arm does get close to the color of the background, so we got to be careful we don't select the actual background. I'll come up here and grab her arm. We'll probably need to cut the hole in her arm again. Don't worry about that. I'm going to zoom in over here. I'm just going to look at this. I want to grab my quick selection tool and just add all this stuff along here. Make sure we're selecting her entire arm, right? People tend to appreciate when you get their entire body in a photo. Great. I'm going to move up here. I'm going to grab that little bit of her shoulder that's not quite fully selected. Something like that should be good. We can make sure we get her the entire bit of her shoulder strap. Good. The hair, we're gonna hit that probably with a little refine edge action. Again, the purpose of this part of the tutorial is not to cover in depth and detail how we use the select and mask, but rather the whole match color thing. See down here, this gray is very similar to the background. Voila. Not quite perfect there. Let's just grab that. Cool. All right, great. That's probably close enough. It's not quite as perfect as I would like it to be. We can go in there with the brush tool and select the mask and clean that up a little. And then we got some stuff we're going to have to erase when we get into select the mask as well. So, all right, great. We've got the general base selection picked out. We're going to go, of course, and choose a select and mask. And again, this is an area where having a graphics tablet can help, because we'll go in there and we will paint away stuff like the hole between her legs and next to both of her arms. So I'm going to zoom in here and select and mask, right? And again, we don't need to be super precise here. Well, I mean, if it's your personal project, yes, be super precise. But in this case, I'm just going to hold down my Alt-Option key, and I'm going to erase away the bit of the selection that's in here, right? You can see it's a pretty quick little process for something like this that's got a nice straight or sharp edge. Make the brush a little smaller using your square bracket keys, holding down Alt-Option again, and I'm just subtracting from my selection. Great, so we got the hole there between her legs, here between her fingers, right? We would erase something like that. All this stuff, the better your selection is, the more realistic your composite is going to look. So we'll just go in there and get rid of all that junk in there. She does have the big hole underneath her arm. I'm just going to go around real quick and look anywhere else that there might be, up here between her fingers, up here as well. So we'll just get rid of all that stuff. Just, very rough, very quick selection, or brushing, I should say. All right, very cool. Let's just back this out. Let's try using the quick selection tool baked into Quick Mask. Hold down the Alt or Option key and try to select here by her arm. You can see, I mean, now it looks like she's had part of her face removed. Not the greatest look. Let's try it over here in this part of her arm and see what we get here. I mean, it just really does a lot of damage to the edges, but for the sake of saving time, I think I'll just roll with that, although I'm really not a fan of it. I'm going to zoom in up here, and I think I'll speed the video up here as I just erase all of this here that has to do with the inside part of her arm. All right, great. There we go. Got that all cut out. What we'll do now is we'll just hit the little eyelash there and the hair with the Refine Edge brush. That's this guy right there. We'll paint over the eyelash there. Well, I want to go back to the control bar, make sure I'm setting it to add. Let's go ahead and paint over the eyelash. Well, we might have picked up the eyeball a little bit there, but not too bad. Let's hit the edge of the hair there. Whoa, that did some crazy damage. Let's undo that. Now I'm just going to paint here along the edge of her hair. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. I think I'm going to right-click, make my brush size a little bit bigger, yeah. So I can paint kind of with there's the softer edge of this Refine Edge. Paint down along the hair that way. All right, I'm just going to create this selection and select the mask, guys. It's still a little hit or miss, to be quite honest. Something like that looks good, cool. And the rest of the arm, this side of the body is gonna, it's not gonna be the greatest, but we're gonna live with it. And there we go. That's probably enough time spent working on this selection. Basically, the idea is get your subject all cut out and ready to go. And I'm gonna drag my properties panel right back here onto screen. There we go. And what we want to do, we'll probably boost the edge detection a little bit, so like 3-4. That's gonna help with some of that refined edge work around her hair. And I'm not going to worry about any of the global refinements or decontaminating color. I'm going to output this selection to a new layer with Layer Mask and hit OK. And there she is in all of her glory, standing alone with that layer mask. So the nice thing about having the layer mask is when I drag her now and drop her, I'm holding her on this tab, and we drop her into this document. The nice thing about still having the layer mask is we can go and tweak the layer mask wherever we need to tweak it. So we can look at her hair and say, well, actually, it came out pretty nicely, right? So we don't need to really adjust that. And down here on her side, like maybe the shirt, we really need to go in there. So I could select the layer mask and take my brush, paint with, not soft light mode. Let's go back to normal blend mode and make the brush tool a little bit smaller with my bracket keys. And I'm just painting with white. So we just come in here and paint white to bring back some of her shirt that looks, particularly messed up. We want to be careful not to get too close to the edge because we'll bring back some of that background color, which of course we don't want to do. But something like that just helps kind of clean things up a little bit. Looks pretty good. Over here, we're missing part of her shirt. You see that right there? It looks like part of the shirt got torn. So bring that back as well. Make sure that everything looks like it belongs. Same thing over here. We're missing a little bit of the shirt down there. All right, that looks good. Let's drag her upwards. She's so much bigger than the background over which we're dropping her that we need to just kind of move her around and make sure everything looks good. All right, so once I like my mask, once it is kind of how I like it, I'm going to lock it in as a smart object. So I'm going to right-click on this and choose Convert to Smart Object. And that's going to make the mask hide temporarily, but it's still in there. If we need to edit the mask, it is still in there. I'm doing this because we're going to go edit, free transform, and scale her down. I don't want to lose the ability to scale her back up. So let's say we make her really tiny and we say, yeah, that's how we want this to look. And the client says, no, she needs to be much bigger in the context of this photo. Because it's a smart object, I can hit Command or Control T and I can scale her right back up and make her huge again. And we're not going to lose any detail. So that's the nice thing about the smart object. She's a little bit too big there. Let's make her about, like this sized, right? Just like she's fitting in over, standing and looking over, or she's at this particular tourist destination and she's, doing her thing, getting some pictures taken. So in order to match the color, there is actually a match color option here in Photoshop Image Adjustments. Down here you can see match color, but it's not active here because we're working with a smart object. And honestly, there's a few things that I like using match color for, and this is not one of them. So what I like to do is a lot of handwork, a lot of kind of killing off contrast for both the model being brought into the composite image and even the background. Now, this background already has the contrast killed off a little bit, so I might not have to do too much in the way of dropping contrast, but let's drop her contrast a little bit. So I'm going to just add a brightness contrast adjustment layer, Command Option or Control Alt and the letter G to clip it to just her, and I'm going to reduce contrast probably to like -50. That's pretty good. And I might even need to drop contrast a little bit more, so we can go with like a levels adjustment layer, Command Option G, Control Alt G to clip it, and I'll just boost the black point a little bit. So something like that, and then maybe I'll drop the white point a little bit as well. So there's before levels, there's after levels. We've really, as you can see, dropped the contrast. Now there's a couple ways you can match color. A really nice, easy way to quickly get a nice bit of color is to duplicate the background over which you're placing your subject. So let's just drag this background layer down to the new layer icon, and we'll drag this up above everything. And now we'll use the average filter. Let's go filter, blur, and just choose average. And it's going to give us the average color of our image, which, as you can see, there's not really a ton of color in there, so we might want to boost the saturation a little bit by going Image, Adjustments, Hue Saturation, and just boost the saturation quite a bit. So now it's like super green. We don't want it to be quite that super green, but just like a nice, a manageable color, right? And we set this to either something like color, which is probably not going to look very good at all, or something more realistically like soft light, and we could clip this to her, Command Option G, and there we go. We've clipped it to her. Now, obviously, she's way too green because there's just not that much green in the background. So we would then reduce the opacity of this until it's starting to look a little bit more like it belongs, something like that. So there's before, there's after. We're getting rid of that overall blue color cast and helping her blend in a little bit more. Now that we've done that, we're going to go ahead and add some color effects to the entire image. So we'll go take the curves adjustment layer here, and I'm going to pull up on the black point for the entire thing, and I'm going to pull down on the white point for the entire thing. Maybe I'll add a little bit of mid-tone contrast. We'll darken things up. I don't know. I don't know how much mid-tone contrast I want to add. Not very much, because we're about to actually pump some contrast into here. There's before, there's after. Great. We're going to use a gradient map adjustment layer, and I'm going to double click my black stop. We can really go with any color we like, but kind of some of the stuff that works well. Let's go with like a dark wine color for the shadows. So a dark, somewhat saturated wine color. And then for the highlights, we're going to go with like a really beige tan. This is kind of like a gradient map take on, having blues in your shadows and orange or yellow in your highlights. But it's kind of obviously, as you can see, a bit more of a subdued effect. And then we would set this to something like the blend mode of soft light. And that's going to really help pull things together. I mean, you can really see now, here's everything, just dragging her right into the photo. And here it is, adding all of these different adjustment layers. It really tends to help things out a bit. And if you think that the effect is applied too strongly on her and needs to be reduced a little bit, well, we can Command or Control click on her, right? I'm clicking right on her thumbnail, Command or Control click on her thumbnail, load her as a selection, select the layer mask for that gradient map, and just go Image, Adjustments, Levels. And what we want to do is make the white of the layer mask a little less white. So we'll drag the output level white slider backward a little bit, just kind of like that. And you can see what's happening. It's making that white kind of more like gray, and hit OK. Command or Control D to deselect, and we just deselect just like that. So there it is without gradient map. There it is after the gradient map. And at this point, we could throw, either a photo filter or even a color balance. There it is, color balance. I'm thinking mixing up with channel mixer. Color balance adjustment layer on top of this, where we could do something like, say, the image needs a little bit more red in the mid-tones. Maybe in the shadows, we need to pump a little bit more in the way of blue. Something like so, and maybe some cyan as well. And then we go to the highlights, where we add a little bit of yellow and a little bit of red, and maybe even just a kiss of green, but really not too much in the way of greens. And there's before that, there's after that. And you can very quickly go in and begin blending the photo. Now, other things that really need to be done to this photo are the blurring of the background needs to be corrected, because like right here, which is very obviously behind her, is also in focus. So part of it is choosing a good background photo as well. But one of the things you definitely want to do is add noise to your image as well. That's going to help them all blend together sort of on a very molecular level. Hold down the Alt or Option key, hit the new layer icon. We've done this 5 or 6 times, it feels like, in this tutorial now. Go with the soft light blend mode. Yep, we're going to fill it with 50% gray. Hit OK. And we'll just go with like the camera raw filter in this case and use the nice, really realistic, crunchy noise we get from camera raw. We're going to go to the Effects tab, increase the grain, increase the size, increase the roughness, hit OK. And then obviously way too much grain, right? Look at that, really bad. We're going to reduce the opacity down to something like 40%. That's pretty good. And now she has the same grain applied to her as the background does. That's also going to help kind of blend her in a little bit. And you could also experiment by just selecting that background layer and doing something like throw a black and white adjustment layer on top of that. Right now the background has been desaturated a bit. It's still getting color from like the gradient map in the foreground here, but we wouldn't want to make it fully black and white. We're just looking to desaturate it a little bit. So just, reduce the opacity of that black and white layer, maybe down to like 20%. There's before, there's after. Just take some of that color out of the background as well. And last but not least, we might want to add a little bit of shadowing. So go up above the color balance, but below the noise. We can just name this layer noise as well. select the color balance adjustment layer, and we're going to be creating a new adjustment layer on top of this. But we're going to use our quick mask mode. So select the quick mask mode, use your brush, and we want a huge brush. So we can right click and just go with a massive brush, 500 plus pixels, and we're just going to paint a nice red area down here, right? Just like that, and hit the letter Q. It's going to load that as a selection. We would go select, modify, feather, and we want to feather it by probably at least 500 pixels. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. And then we're going to go and drop a levels adjustment layer, right? A levels adjustment layer. And it's going to use that selection we created as its mask. We probably want to move that downward. So grab your move tool and just drag that mask down. You can see kind of until we're just brightening up the bottom part of the image. We probably need to blur the mask a little bit. Go filter, blur. And by the way, we need to blur it. Let me alter option, click on the mask. We need to blur it because you can see we're going to get a hard line across the top, and that will in all likelihood be noticeable. Alter option, click your mask to get back to the image. Now let's go filter, blur, Gaussian blur. Oh, that's box blur. Let's go Gaussian blur. There we go. And, something like, I don't know, let's go with 50 or something. It really doesn't need a huge amount. We'll go with something like 50. That should work. And then select the levels. And all we need to do is boost the blacks. So we're just going to darken up the bottom part of the image. I'm going to drag my middle gray slider over toward the whites a little bit more. And this is going to add just more of that natural bend to the photo that you would expect. And now both her and the background have the same exact lighting down there near the base of the photo. It's going to really help blend her into the image quite a bit more. So that's how you cut out a subject, move them over to another photo, and just some general basic ideas in terms of helping match the color a little bit. So, there was, if I hold down Alter Option, just turn on the background layer and her, there's what they looked like when we first dragged them in, and then here's what it looks like once we start applying color treatment and messing around and just generally cleaning things up a little bit. So let's actually go back to the original photo where we have this selection and talk about something called puppet warp. This is the 27th thing, and I think the last thing we'll cover, because we've spent enough time here in part 3. This is going to be a long one. So what we want to do is select the layer which we placed the mask on, right? We've got that layer that we brought out of select and mask, and we could apply the layer mask. Maybe we'll do that to keep things simple, but you can apply a puppet warp just to a layer like this. Let's just duplicate this layer actually, just so we can keep the mask layer. I'm going to right click on that layer mask and choose apply layer mask, and it's going to, you can see, delete the entire background. We also have no layer mask to edit anymore either. Puppet warp is cool because you can actually change the posture and posing of people pretty incredibly. Like if somebody has their arm dangling loosely, you could in theory lift their arm up and make them, make like a waving sign or something. Let's go edit and choose good old puppet warp. And you can see what's going to happen is it places this series of grids over our image just very automatically. We can do something like, say we want this puppet warp to be very rigid or to distort the image. I'm going to stick with normal. Let's keep things simple here. Density, you could go with fewer points, right? Something like that. Or you could go with even more points. Well, I think we'll just stick with the normal. We have an expansion option too. We're going to leave that at the default of 2. We do want to see the mesh. And let's say we want to change the way her head is tilted. So I need to place an anchor point. So that's going to be like this point here. And maybe I'll place a point up here on her head, because the thought would be we could drag the point on her head and we could rotate her head. But you can see everything is simply going to pivot on that center point as though we like drove a nail through the base of her neck and stuck her to a wall. So we want to add some other points. Let's say like, all right, we got point, like her knee is a joint. Down here at the bottom, that'll be just, we're going to pin that stuff down. Up here, her hip would be a joint. The other side of her hip would be a joint. Here at probably the base of the rib cage, we would have joints. Her elbow obviously is a joint. Her wrist is a joint. Her shoulder, other elbow, other wrist, something like that. So now that we've kind of locked things in a little bit, we can grab her head and we can sort of reposition her head a little bit. You see that? You gotta be careful you don't like warp things too much. We could take her wrist here and push her wrist inward, which would sort of duck her head down a little bit more. We could boost her elbow, right? As if she's making a little bit more of a flex. We could boost her shoulder a little bit, make it look like she's shrugging a little more. We could move the base of her neck over, maybe straighten her head out a little bit and expand the shoulder here, therefore making it look like she has broader shoulders than she does. We could bring her elbow out. We could bring her elbow in. You can see you can do a lot of really cool stuff. We could bring her wrist in a little bit just to tighten things up. We could shift this side of her body over a little bit, almost as though we're using liquify, right? But we're really going with the flow of the body. We can push the booty out a little bit. We can bring this hip. This hip probably should be pushed inward just a little bit and upward. Obviously we're going a little ridiculous here. We're going up and above what we really should be. And let's pull these points downward just a little bit, just so we still know the bottom part of the legs is going to extend off of the image. And we can go ahead and just commit this change. So we can just go ahead and choose that, and we've puppet warped the image. I can undo it. There she is before, and there she is after. We've shrugged her shoulders, her head's smaller, her entire posture has changed. There's a lot of really cool things you can do with puppet warp. This might not be like the most realistic of things, but it certainly gives you an idea of how good old puppet warp works. Edit, puppet warp, a lot of really, really cool stuff you can do with the puppet warp when it's needed, but there's also a lot of really bad and messed up stuff you can do to mess up your images and make them look, very not realistic. So at long last, part 3 is coming to a close. Boy, it's been a long one, hasn't it? Man alive. We've covered a lot, though. We've talked about, puppet warp. We've talked about a little compositing, dodging and burning, adding the tattoo to somebody's body and working with blend modes and adjustment layers, masking and all that kind of stuff, and so much more. Now, if you've enjoyed this tutorial, again, you can hit the like button, but more importantly, make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any Photoshop or photography or any tutorials that come out on this channel in the future. Guys, for creating and working with all these different effects that as a photographer, I think you just have got to know. And hey, stay tuned for part 4. That's it. Get it, got it, good. Nathaniel Dodson, cutvid.com. I'll catch you in the next one.